so much to Chris and to Adrian. Big apologies for all these screens going up and down and various technical problems during your presentation and for the audience. I know it's kind of distracting and so on, but it's necessary, I think, for the presenter is another set of paired speakers, and if you want to come up, the two are Lygia Sabbag, Gibb, and Luiza Matos de Oliveira.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable for you guys, but I will keep telling you to look at the screen over there. Oh. So just so you know, we changed a little bit. So my name is Lygia, here is Luiza. We are both from Brazil. We are going to be talking a little bit about increasing inequality in working time as an international trend. So our research comes trying to fill in a sort of a gap, because inequality in the labor market normally is only researched as the income inequality. So we think another variable is very important, which would be working time distribution, as the inequality that's coming and growing in this regard. So we have recent data in Canada, France, Germany, UK, US, and Brazil from 81 to 2016. And we know similar trends, even though Brazil is like not a developed country. But of course, there are important differences, but I think the similarities help us to understand a little bit of, as it is like a global problem, let's say, for the workers. So we also going to take a gender perspective in the issue, because talking about working time and not taking gender perspective would leave like a big gap, so we're going to be talking about both. So to start, increasing inequality in working time. So there's more flexibility of working time, and that increases the working time inequality. So what we mean by that? More people working longer hours, more people working less hours. Working time flexibility depends also on who are you talking about, like if it's a man or a woman. So, but the flexibility depends the sexual division of labor, both productive labor and reproductive labor. So talking about productive labor, overall, there is a decrease in working hours. But that decrease has more to do to the inequality among the hours worked by workers than overall reduction in working hours. I will show you some data and then maybe understand a bit better. So there's also an increased dispersion of working hours, increasing the inequality in this sense, and an increase in part-time jobs. And it's important to highlight that a significant minority of part-timers are employed time. So here, that's the decrease of annual working hours. So in every country, it's decreasing. So in Canada, it's a decrease on those who work 4 hours plus. But in France and Germany, there is an increase of those who work 4 hours plus. And in Brazil, there is a decrease as well in this band, but it's actually a decrease from the 45 to 48 hours band and 48 plus band, because in Brazil we have a longer working hours than here. So this table, I'm sorry, it is a little small, and I'm not going to go all the data there, it's too much, but I'm happy to share with anybody who's interested after. So just to say that, like for instance in Canada, in 81, we had like 58% of the population working 40 hours or more, and it's 49% now, so 10% decrease. And in France, on the other hand, in 86, we had 38% of the population working from 35 to 39 hours. But that, and that decreased to 32 in 2016, and on the other hand, increased the 40 hours more. The same trend you see in Germany. So they had a better working time from 38 to 39 in the 90s, but that increase, I mean, the number of people who works 4 hours or more increases in the last couple or like 5 years. In Brazil, as I said, like there is decrease in 40 hours or more, but that's because like it's 45 hours or plus or 48 plus. So that's what we actually had a gain in that in Brazil in the last years. I'm not sure if it's going to continue because everything that's going on, I think you've heard. But yeah, so until 2016, it was a little bit better for the workers in Brazil. So about part-time. So in all countries, it increased in the last years, except US. In Germany, we had this phenomenon of mini jobs. I'm not a big specialist in Germany, but the mini jobs are jobs that are very low hours and very low pay. And that's a lot of those part-time jobs. So the increase in part-time jobs are those mini jobs. And there they increase like 11% in the last 20 years, 30 years. So, and the share of involuntary part-timers also increased everywhere. 41% in France, 25% of the workers in Canada are involuntary part-timers, and 14% UK. So here is the incidence of part-time and full-time. And you can see just Germany here, like you had 10% part-time employment in '86, and you have 22 now. So it's increasing a lot. And this is the involuntary part-time within part-time employment, sorry. And so it's relatively high, or like France is the most striking, and Canada is like 25%. So 25% that work part-time is not happy with their working time. I mean, I think they're not happy with their wages. So in that, there's also a gender perspective. So we're going to talk about labor force participation and productive working time inequality. So about labor force participation, despite the growth, both employment and labor force participation rate for women are low in every country that we looked at. And in addition, in Brazil, unemployment rate for women is higher. So in Brazil, women are more vulnerable to informal labor. I mean, I think always, but specifically in Brazil because we have a high level of informality. So that's specifically not really good for women. And part of this women informal, but also a little bit formal now because there was a formality for domestic labor lately. But you have also a gender perspective in the domestic labor, so it's a lot to talk about. I mean, I cannot go on about all this stuff, but it's good to have in mind that like also those other perspectives like gender that we are talking about, but race that we cannot really go now. But so here, just to point out that labor force participation rate of men is always higher than women, so 70 men, 61 women in Canada, and in Brazil it's like the difference is almost 20 points. It's like 76 men, 54 women, just so you have an idea. So the labor force participation rate is of women is really low or much lower, and the employment rate in Brazil for women is higher. So 7.9 for men, 11.7 for women. So about the productive working time inequality, men's working time is very concentrated in the 40 hours plus band, when women's is more distributed within the different time bands. Women's share of part-time employment is much higher than men, and most of it, I mean a lot of it is like women are more inclined to choose a part-time job because then they can combine with reproductive work. So here is just to show that, for instance, in Canada, men is like 64% of men is working 4 hours or more, and 34% of women is working 40 hours or more. And that difference, like in United Kingdom, for instance, is 60% of men working 4 hours or more, and 29% of women working 40 hours or more, and women is more, so it's more distributed within the bands, and men is more concentrated in the 40 plus. Here's the gender share of part-time employment. So part-time is heavy on women in Canada, 67% of bike farmers are women and 32 are men. Yeah, so, okay, I mean, let's just, like, so we can have a general idea. That's the trend, right? I'm just trying to show the trend, and then we can discuss a little bit more. It's more heavy on men, because more, I believe more women choose to have part-time jobs so they can cope with reproductive labor as well. And that's what Luiza is going to be talking about now.
So to talk about this difference, we have to talk about also reproductive labor. Reproductive labor is the unpaid labor carried out in the domestic sphere to reproduce the family or the workforce, to use Marx's terms. So it constitutes of cleaning, washing dishes, clothes, buying, preparing food, taking care of children, and of the other. We also have to talk about emotional labor, a concept which is, we learned is very used here in Canada, which is managerial conceptual work regarding household needs, which is also very important. ILO's report, Women at Work, gathers data for 46 countries in the world and divides it into developing countries and developed countries. So we can see that in developing countries, you can see that's the working time for people in developing countries and developed countries. Working time is higher in developing countries than in developed countries, as you can see, but in both cases, you can see that there's a very clear bias towards unpaid work and gender. So in both cases, for both developing and developed countries, women work more unpaid hours than men. So regarding time spent in unpaid, paid, and total work by sex, we selected some data from those countries we were talking about. So I'm going to show the graph, which is easier to see. In blue, you have the amount of minutes spent per day by men and women doing unpaid work. So that's the blue line, the blue thing. The yellow one refers to the amount of minutes spent in paid work. So you can see that men in every country that we have there on the graph work less hours in unpaid work, but work more hours in paid work. So you can see that's the same trend for all the countries that we analyzed, and I'm going to show some data on Brazil afterwards. But if you add the amount of minutes spent in paid and unpaid work per day, you can see that the working time for women in all cases is bigger than for men. So we have to account for that for all cases. That's the data for Brazil. If you see the purple line there, it's the amount of hours that women work, paid work per day, per week, sorry. And the blue line just above it, it's the amount of hours that men work, paid work per week. So you can see that men work a little bit more during the week than with paid work. But if you add also the amount of hours with unpaid work, you can see that the total working time for women is higher in all cases throughout from 2004 to 2015, which is what we analyzed there. So we can see that the last line there, the light blue one, is the total working time for women, which is higher than the total working time for men in Brazil too, which is the green one for men. So you can see that that's also very important. And also the most recent data that we have on Brazil shows that 51% of occupied men declared having performed domestic work or declared to have the habit of performing domestic work in Brazil, while 92% of the occupied women declared to have performed domestic work. So you can see that that's not true that women do more domestic work because they are not working. The thing is that we usually combine both things. In addition, we also have lower wages. ILO's Women at Work shows that it would take 70 years to close the gap between the wage gap between men and women if we keep up the current rate of reduction. Nowadays, the medium wage for a woman is 77% of the medium wage for a man, and this difference cannot be explained by age, by education or by working time. And to get to the final remarks, we can see by our analysis that there is an increasing inequality in working time among workers. And to grasp that, we have to talk about the difference between employed and unemployed workers, the difference among employed as we showed, and also we have to talk about reproductive labor in a gender perspective. And gender inequality is reinforced by an even division of paid and unpaid work nowadays. And also, flexibility is a capital-driven phenomenon. The IMF shows in a latest report that part-time jobs led to a decrease in unemployment, but a slower wage growth. I'm not sure if it's good to have the IMF backing our argument, but that's there. We can see also that flexibility, especially part-time jobs, it affects workers negatively, disregarding national boundaries. So we believe that working time issues have the potential to be a tool to unite workers globally.